I'm Jocelyn Wehr. I'm a digital archivist here at the Kansas Historical Society. Your schedule might say that Matt Veach is up next. We're actually going to do a switcheroo. I'm going to present on the creation of digital content, and Matt's going to present on the preservation of digital content, so it makes a little more sense that way. And this presentation will serve more as a segue between processing and preserving your physical content and creating and preserving digital content that can reach more users. First, I'd like to talk about a few projects that we're working on at the Kansas Historical Society. The first is Kansas Memory, the website kansasmemory.org. It's our digital repository of our collections. This includes maps, photographs, diaries, posters, audio-visual materials, some state publications as well. And we'll surpass about 350,000 images by May, so we're really cranking out some images. The second item we're involved in is Chronicling America. It's a website hosted by the Library of Congress, and it's funded through the National Endowment for the Humanities. And this website contains historic newspapers from about 30 states so far. They have about 6 million pages up on this website. Kansas has 154,949 pages available. And what this grant is, it's awarded by NEH, and they award these grants to one institution per state for 2-year cycles, 100,000 pages per cycle. And we received our first grant in 2009, which is when I came aboard. This is the project I worked on. We got a supplemental grant in 2011, and then we're hoping for a third and final grant this fall. So NEH likes to limit it to 3 awards per institution. That way they can get more states involved, hopefully get up to all 50 states sometime in the next 5-10 years. So some of the cities that are currently represented on Chronicling America, we have quite the list. Abilene, Atchison, Colby, Dodge City, Emporia, Goodland, Hayes, Hutchinson, Iola, Junction City, Kinsley, Lawrence, Leavenworth, Liberal, Marysville, Meade, Meriden, Oskaloosa, Phillipsburg, Prairie City, Salina, Topeka, Troy, Waukene, White Cloud, and Wichita. Cities that are coming soon include Baxter Springs, Chanute, Garnett, Great Bend, Medicine Lodge, and Wellington. So if you're interested in any of those, go to the website. Yeah, the goal is to, I think NEH thinks if you can't get your own program started in 6 years, they're done with you. So hopefully in the time span that we've worked on this project that we can jumpstart our own program and start hosting some of our own content. But yes, the goal is to continue forward after the grant ends. Another partnership we're working on is with Ancestry.com. And what we did was we allowed them to come into the archives. They digitized over 1 million images, lots of census records, Civil War enlistment papers, naturalization records, and so forth. And currently, anyone with a current Kansas driver's license can access these images for free. You just need to go to our website. It's kshs.org. And then there's a research tab. And if you click on that, you'll see an ancestry link. And so you'll go to that link. It'll ask you to input your driver's license number. It'll just ping the system, say yes or no, this is a valid driver's license, and you're in. So it's a really great resource. And we are actually considering doing something along this with newspapers. Ancestry owns newspapers.com. And so we're in early talks right now to try to get something started similar to that with newspapers.com. Yeah, just the Kansas ones, yeah. You have to actually subscribe to Ancestry for Missouri records or Oklahoma records or anything like that. But it's quite the collection of Kansas stuff we've got up. So you might start there, and if you want a subscription, go for it. Yeah. True, yes. We do have access to all of Ancestry.com if you visit our research room just over in the archives here. Thanks for that clarification. Some reasons that you might want to invest in some digital collections. First up is promotion. Say you have an upcoming museum exhibit that you're really interested in getting more attention for. You can throw up a digital image of one of your exhibits. Or say you have a new acquisition that you're really excited about and you want to gain some publicity and some promotion for that. Also, probably the most important reason to digitize is research access. If, say, you're a smaller institution and you don't have your own website to host your images, that could just be a single computer workstation at your institution that provides research access. So it's the small institutions and the large institutions can both benefit from the research access. Also, digitization can be a source of income sometimes. You have the ability to sell high-resolution copies of any of the digital images that you create, and then that income allows you to digitize more. So if you were to visit Kansas Memory and you found an image that you really liked of someone you knew or a family member perhaps, and you wanted a high-resolution copy, we can order that for you and provide that for you at a cost, and then in a way that allows us to keep digitizing. So you could try that out at your own institution if that's of interest. And then also preservation. Digitization is generally not a preservation method, it's an access method. But it can be used for preservation purposes if your physical content is deteriorating to the point where you need a digital surrogate. So in that case, preservation is a great tool in the digital world. Some common file types that you might come across as you start investigating digital content. TIFFs are primarily used for your master copy. They're your archival copy. They're the ones that'll sit on a server or sit on a hard drive somewhere, and you won't ever touch them, won't ever receive or recall them, really. Your JPEGs are going to be your access copies. JPEGs are generally a lot smaller than TIFFs. TIFFs are a very large file. JPEGs are going to be smaller, easier to use. If you have a website, you're most likely putting JPEGs on that website. Yeah. Some other file types that you might come across include WAV files. We use those for audio. MPEG files, we use those for video. Audio-video conversion to digital is quite the learning curve. It's one thing to produce a TIFF or a JPEG and have that great image, but manipulating audio and video files takes a little bit more learning. It also depends greatly on the equipment that you have. If you're perusing a garage sale and you see some obsolete equipment, a side-by-side cassette tape deck, and you think, oh, that's obsolete. But in order to digitize that, perhaps that's the equipment that you need. So even though you see these obsolete formats, and you brush them off, those aren't important, but actually they may be important if you need that equipment to digitize. So just keep that in mind, start hoarding all that equipment. Let's see. And also there are some vendors too that if you have a cassette that you just want someone to digitize for you, you can take a VHS to a company and they can do it for $12, $15. So that's always, if you don't want to do it in-house, don't want to do it yourself, there's always companies out there that are willing to do that for you. And there should be a handout in your workbooks that looks something like this. It says master files on top. And these are the imaging resolution standards that we use here in our lab. On the top right side, you can see it says reflective scans. These are going to be your photographs, your maps, any graphic material. And what you're going to do is you're going to look at measure the longest side of the item. Say you have a 5x7 photograph. So you're going to look at 5x7. 7 is the longest side in inches. And so you're going to scan your item at 800 ppi. And ppi stands for pixels per inch. You might also be familiar with dots per inch, DPI. They're fairly interchangeable. Don't let them mess you up. DPI is generally a printing term, but you can use DPI or PPI. So in that case, a 5x7, you'd go ahead and scan it at 800 DPI. Say you had an oversized map, like a 15 by 20 inch map. On this one, it's off the chart. So since your longest side is off the chart, you can go ahead and say, okay, 300 DPI would be sufficient for that. On the top left here, we have transparent scans. Those are slides and negatives. Those are generally more high maintenance to get a good image off of, so that's why we upped the PPI for those. and you can see those all listed there. Also, document scans. These are going to be your manuscripts and your printed text. They don't have quite the quality of a printed or a graphic image, so 400 dpi is sufficient for those. You can do grayscale, you can do color, you can do black and white. It's up to you. So these are just guidelines that you might be interested in. Yeah.
I understand DPI. Mm-hmm. I understand inches, but I don't know what PX. The center column is target size for full size print. What is a PX?
I think that.
What are those? Is that my target?
Yeah, that's your. If you were going to print out, like you had the digital image and you were going to send it to a printer to print out, those would be like the number of pixels that the printer. So that's more of a printing term if you were going to physically print out your digital item. And you can, our target I think is 8 by 10 at 600. So just write that down in the future, and if you have a digital image that you can play with and you can resize, if you can get that to an 8 by 10 at 600, you're pretty good. So yeah. I had not noticed that. Thanks for pointing that out. And down on the bottom left here, it says all files are saved in uncompressed TIFF format. That's where your TIFF comes in. It's your master file. Scans taken at 24-bit, grayscale at 8-bit. Bit depth is, if you're interested in what bit depth is, it's more of a technical term. It refers to the number of unique colors that are within the item. So it's a ones and zeros binary thing. So if you're not interested in it, don't worry about the bit depth. Yeah.
What are you saving your scans on?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little later too with preservation, because that's where you save them is a huge part of it. All right, our workflow has taken on a changing approach. We used to use flatbed scanners primarily. We've started using more DSLR cameras. And DSLR cameras stands for digital single lens reflex. They're the fancy cameras with the lens that separates, and rather than your point and shoot digital cameras that a lot of you might have, these are a little more pricey. Flatbeds are still great. They're great for slides. They're great for photographs. Negatives are very useful because they scan in high resolution. You can get 4,000 dpi off of a flatbed scanner. However, they have long scan times. If you scanned something at 4,000 dpi, you might be waiting for a while. And also, they're not conducive to items that aren't flat. Obviously, flatbed scanner. So if you had photographs or manuscripts or something that laid flat easily, you could throw it on a flatbed. The DSLR cameras offer you instant capture. You push the shutter, there's your image. You don't have to wait for anything to scan. There's also an emphasis on color capture, and you can easily do 3D materials and oversized materials. On a flatbed scanner, we can do about 200 images a day. On a digital camera, we can do about 1,300 images a day. So depending on the needs of your institution, if you just have 100 photographs in this one collection, a flatbed scanner would perfectly suffice for what you were doing. If you had a giant archives where you just wanted to get stuff up online as fast as you could, maybe a digital camera is a better option for you. There are DSLR cameras offer more detail capture. They have the better color turnout. Flatbed scanners, they're not as expensive. On the flatbed scanners, I have one I just bought just for home use, and it was $80. It's a fairly small size, but it would do for a lot of institutions. You could go way up from there. A digital camera is going to run you probably $3,000 if for a fancy one. And I'll show you some of the items that we work with. These are the flatbed scanners that we have. On the left here is an HP 8300. It's an older model. I'm sure you can find it on Amazon for maybe cheaper. The size of that one's probably yay big, the size of the podium. We also have a Epson 10,000, which is larger than that. That accommodates a lot more larger materials that are flat. And we also have an Epson V750. That's good for negatives, slides, photographs, all that fun stuff. A lot smaller. The one I bought was an Epson V300, so it's a little smaller than that one even. If you're interested in purchasing a flatbed scanner, you want to look at the platen size. The platen is the glass, so you obviously need to get a good enough size that it accommodates your largest item that you're opting to scan. And then you also want to look, is there any accommodating or accompanying software that comes with it? Sometimes you can get a free Photoshop with it, or just these little added perks that come with different flatbed scanners. Just do some shopping and see what you get. Also, the output format is important. Some of the older models might just offer you JPEG or PDF. Some of the newer models most often will offer you that option to save in TIFF. So TIFF is the keyword here. And then digital cameras. On the left is a Nikon D800. On the right, we have two of these Canon Mark IIIs. The left one, 36 megapixel, the right one is 22 megapixel. But similar to DPI, you get up so high in the megapixels and you get up so high in the DPI. The technology today is so great that you're going to get great images off of either one of these. So don't fixate on DPI or don't fixate on megapixels, because sometimes the only difference is price. So, I think the Nikon is about 3,000. The Canon, I think, is 2,500. So, but your institution might not need 3 of them. So, and if you're looking into buying a digital camera, just some things to think about would be sensor size, which is where the image is actually captured. Again, is there any accompanying software? I know Canon comes with a software that allows you to use your computer as your shutter button, so you can, hoist the camera up in the air. You can look at your computer monitor. You can get it where you want it, and then you can use your mouse button as the shutter. So just a lot of perks, add-ons to these cameras. Some other equipment, you might be familiar with the one on the left, planetary scanners. These are often a little more dated. We use these less often in the research room for making copies for patrons. The book cradle component on this is great. If you needed to, you could take off the scanner head and put up a digital camera, and then you'd have a working book cradle that would be easier on the spine, which I'm sure the previous presenter talked about, preserving the spine of books and materials like that. And then on the right, we have 2 of these Kaiser copy stands. These are what our Canons rest on. It's probably, to give you a size, again, it's probably the base is the size of this podium, and the column there probably goes up 3 feet. So that's what the size of that one looks like. And again, both of our Canons are used on that copy stand. And here's some examples of what the Canon on the copy stand can produce. The image on the right side is a little cut off. What we do is we set the camera height on the copy stand to accommodate, again, our largest material. If we're working on a folder, then it's our largest item in the folder. If it's a collection, we set the height of the camera to accommodate the largest item in the collection. And then we just start imaging. It's just a conveyor belt sort of process. And what this does is it cuts down on the post-processing time, which this could include cropping, de-skewing an image. If you got it slightly crooked, you have to go back in using like Photoshop or another photo editing program, crop it down, get it all nicely de-skewed, nice and straight. With this, you don't have to spend all that time. Again, if you have the time and it's a small collection, feel free to crop and de-skew to your heart's delight. If you have a huge collection that you just want to get up, this is a good option for you. Yeah, question was, do we zoom in to get a more relative size? No, because the image quality, again, on those cameras is enough that this, if you zoomed into 100% on the website, you would be able to clearly read either of those. And when we first started this, I was a bit reluctant. This was just a decision we made a year ago to image this way. I liked to have the nice consistent black border all the way around. I liked that. And so when my boss said, okay, this is what we're going to start doing, I was like, that just looks weird to me. But if you look at that, it's actually a more consistent image size because the black is part of the image. The item is smaller, but the image is the same size, unless you're cut off there on the right side. But yeah, I see what you're saying by why don't we zoom in, but we do crop down, get the most we can for like photographs. This technique we only use for text-based manuscripts, that sort of thing. All right, if you're interested, if you have a lot of oversized items or a lot of 3D objects and you're interested in setting up some sort of studio environment, or you have the time or the money to do so, these are just some quick lighting options. Of course, flatbed scanners have their own internal light. The copy stand has their own lights. This is more for if you want to set up a studio, like I said. Rather than using the digital camera, the internal flash of the digital camera, if we use some of these sources, we're better able to control what our output image looks like. On the left, you have the tungsten lights. These are bright, hot, fluorescent lights. We don't use those too often. Strobes you might be more familiar with if you've had your portrait taken. These are charged, so you're more easily able to control the output flash. Again, if you're using a digital camera with these, you can change the power of the strobe to match like your f-stop and your aperture and all those digital camera techniques. And then modeling lights on the right. These are more of a what you see is what you get type thing. They're just, we use these a lot with the book cradle. They're nothing fancy, just good old-fashioned fluorescent light bulbs. And this one, if you were to look at this one on the website, the colors would really pop out at you. You'd be able to zoom in at 100%. We have a lot of these plat maps in the archives. This was taken with a Canon with the strobe lights. We just put it flat on the ground, set up the strobe lights on either side, had a digital camera hoisted above it, and took a shot. And this is a really great example, if you could zoom in, to see what the digital cameras are able to do. Some of you might not have 3D objects, so this might not apply to you, but also if you had a digital camera with a tripod or a copy stand or something, you could do something similar to this. And what this background is, it's just an infinity background. So if you were to take a white material, you could be poster board, paperboard, whatever it might be, and just hold it at a 90-degree angle, slightly bent. You could put your object here in the center with your camera on either side, and you'd get that infinity background. So there's no harsh lines in the back. It almost just looks like it goes out into oblivion. It looks really nice on the website. So that's one option if you have a lot of 3D objects. Yes, there is actually technology out there now. The folks at Fort Hays State University have some new technology they're working with, which is a 3D scanner. You put your item, say this water bottle, in the center, and it goes all the way around, and it's really great. So archaeology artifacts, it's an improving technology, but it's definitely out there now. Some good old metadata. You wouldn't be in a library or museum setting without good old metadata. The equipment you use will often attach technical metadata, when it was taken, what camera it was taken with, what the DPI was. So all that technical metadata is already in your image and you don't know it. Some other items you might want to decide upon is how well you're going to describe your item. Are you just going to do title, date, location, description, and call it good, which is oftentimes what we do to get us started. You can use some Dublin core schema, which are the basic 15 elements, such as title, date, things that you would use to describe your materials. Yeah. We do not. We let our database kind of handle that more than actually putting it into the image itself. So does that make sense? Yeah. Also, you'll want to figure out what controlled vocabulary you want to use. Here we use faceted browsing on Kansas Memory. It's just up to you. You're going to have to come up with a local taxonomy, or you can use Library of Congress subject headings would probably just be, if you have a cataloger, that would probably be the easiest method. Also, user-generated metadata. We would love to be able to, on Kansas Memory, allow users to comment on an item or tag an item. Say you have a photograph of a house with a family, maybe a dog in the front, and we faceted browsing, we call it, okay, this is a family, this is a house, but we forget the dog. And so a user can come through and say, oh, they forgot the dog, so they tag it. If you've been familiar with the process of tagging, they can tag it as dog, and other users can do similar items. So this one might require a little more work, because not everybody plays with the rules on this one. You might get some interesting tags. So it depends, again, how much time and effort you want to put into it. Some other considerations include the level of editing that you want to do. Again, this is post-processing. This is what you're going to do in your Photoshop or your photo editing programs. What's your border width going to be once you take that photographic image? Are you going to prefer one background color to the other? We kind of flip-flop between white and black, depending on what the image is. Sometimes when you scan negatives, they can come out really dull, more gray than black and white. And you can go into Photoshop and you can adjust. It's called levels or the histogram. And it's a chart that looks like this, just up and down lines. And you can mess with that and it can improve your contrast. So this is an ongoing learning process. Get your feet wet, play around. Digital technology is pretty forgiving, so you can always just rescan it and play with it again. Say you have a scrapbook or a photo album. Are you going to digitally capture that photograph page? If you have 4 photographs within a page, are you going to digitally capture that? Take the photograph booklet apart? Are you going to capture the individual photographs? Lots of things to think about. I think most part what we do is if we get a photo album in, we will digitally capture the entire page no matter what's on it. If it's in really poor condition, we'll take it apart at that point. If it's in good condition, we'll digitally capture the entire image and then leave it intact. So it's really up to whatever you decide to do at your own institution. Some other examples. We have stereoscopes, which are those side-by-side identical images. There's also daguerreotypes, which are those fancy cased images. When we first started Kansas Memory, we would crop down to the photograph itself. And then we quickly learned that users want to see the entire item. So if it's a stereoscope, don't crop down to one side of it. If it's a daguerreotype, don't crop out the frame, because that frame is sometimes the coolest part of the image. Are you going to scan backsides? If it's a postcard and your description says this is a postcard and then you don't scan the back, a user is going to automatically ask, okay, well, what's on the back? Even if there's nothing on the back, if we call it a postcard, we scan the back. So just a technique to keep in mind. Yeah. Nope, they are 2 separate files, depending on how you store them or what your database is like. They would just be 2 files, separate files associated with one item, if that makes sense. So you could call it picture of a dog, or postcard of a dog, and then you would just have 2 files associated with that item. Also, file naming standard, this kind of goes along with that. You're going to have to decide at your institution what your file naming standard is going to be. We use arbitrary numbers that are assigned in the order in which the digital object is created, so it's really arbitrary. We use 8 digits with leading zeros, so it kind of makes it more symmetrical, more easier to pick out your numbers. Color management is also, again, if you have the time, the money, the interest, are you going to replace your overhead lights with daytime lights? If you're working with photographs, sometimes the fluorescence can skew the photograph. Just something to think about. You can also calibrate your monitors. Oftentimes, 2 monitors will render the same photograph differently. There's software out there that you can make them look the same. So another just idea. You can also white balance with a color chart. You could do this with a flat scanner or a digital camera. If you put this color chart down with the image you were looking to shoot, you could tell the camera, well, this is white, this is black, this is red, this is blue, and then the camera would say, okay, after it takes a shot, you could go into Photoshop and then just tweak it just enough so that it looked more natural. Let's see, copyright. This is from when you first get an object, when you digitize an object, this is a concern throughout. So, especially with newspapers, you might have the blessing of a publisher to digitize a 2009 issue of your newspaper, which is great, but you don't necessarily have the rights to digitize the syndicated content of that newspaper. So just fair warning. We love digitizing newspapers, so just a fair warning. We also we're working on currently a large correspondence collection from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and there are some poems in this collection. And so since that's still the intellectual property of the creator, we digitize the poems, we just don't make them available to the public. Also transcriptions and OCR. Many people, OCR stands for optical character recognition. And there are software programs out there like Abby Fine Reader that what they do is they take a text document that is just an image of text and it'll turn it into a searchable text so that like Google can find it. And this is only with typewritten mostly materials. Handwritten materials, you still have to go for the good old-fashioned transcription from a volunteer. Many people start a digitization project with OCR being the #1 priority. But OCR can be very tedious and sometimes time consuming to fix all the little incorrect, mistakes that it makes. It's a computer software, so you're gonna have to spend some time fixing the mistakes. What we do is we make digitization the priority, we make access the priority, and then as staff time and volunteer time accommodate, we can focus on transcriptions and OCR. Also hosting and storage. I think Matt might talk a little bit about this when it comes to preserving your items. You can store it locally. It could be a $100 hard drive. You could store it off-site on a big server. You could partner with larger institutions in your area. If they say, hey, we have some server space, I know you're a smaller institution, we could partner together and make something work. Also, you could pay someone like a vendor to host your items, or you could use the cloud, which is a networking computer system. But again, this depends on how much time you have, how much money you have, and how much IT support you have. Just some different access platforms. Since our databases and our front-end interface, like Kansas Memory, that was built in-house, so I don't have a lot of experience with these. However, these are some that are popular and that have been used. They're both paid services. Content DM is really popular. You're probably familiar with that. WordPress, and then also some more open source platforms. Yeah.
They're not going to crash and it's going to be stable.
Yeah, the question was, do any of these platforms offer some security with your items if they were to crash and you put your entire photograph collection on here? I'm not sure. You'd probably have to do some asking of the individual companies, but I know different vendors that might digitize them for you. They could back them up. It would just depend on the individual companies. Yeah. Yeah. Was that Omeka? Is that what you said? Yeah. Yeah, Pat. Yeah, Pat said that be sure we have the TIFF, the archival master copy, and we have the JPEG. So make sure you just have lots of copies, and to prevent anything from, if something did crash and you were hosting it offsite, you'd have that backup copy. Yeah. Yeah, we do use Abby Fine Reader, but it's an older version. I don't know if you can buy older versions of Abby Fine Reader, but that's what we use. And then some vendors, again, since most of our digitization is done in-house, we haven't worked extensively with any of these companies besides iArchives, who did our Chronicling America newspapers. iArchives is now owned by Ancestry. Seems like everyone's owned by Ancestry nowadays. Some local vendors you might be interested in: Scanning Americas in Lawrence, Imaging Office Systems in Kansas City, Missouri, or Wichita. And we did have a meet and greet with them. We haven't utilized their services, but they were very interested in what we were telling other people, and they were very interested in meeting our specifications. American Micro in Kansas City, Missouri. There's also national vendors, again, iArchives, Ancestry, Advantage Preservation in Iowa. They deal a lot with microfilm. Northern Micrographics in Wisconsin. So just some, if you're interested in not able to do any of this digitization in-house, you can always give it to a vendor, yeah. I know there's, let's see, when it comes to cleaning up and editing, I don't have a lot of experience with that, so you might want to use a vendor. I know a lot of photography stores, sometimes they'll have conversion services on the side. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any locally, but there are plenty out there. All right, so if you do use a vendor, just make sure that your contract is what you want. Most vendors are for-profit. Make sure you get what you want out of it. Don't let them talk you into believing that you just need PDFs, because they have to produce TIFFs anyway, so make sure you get those TIFFs. And try not to let them dictate to you how you can and cannot use what you physically own. So just be sure to, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the question was, she took some photographs in. Were they negatives originally?
They were actually my photographs.
Okay. Yeah, she took some photographs in, and the vendor that she used made some negatives off of that, but told her that the negatives were now his property, and that she could not have those back. The photographs she got back, but the negatives he retained for his own who knows what. That's just a messy, yeah. Yeah, but you have the right to come up with some sort of contract in the front end, but that's a messy situation. I'm sorry I had to deal with that. Yeah. Yeah. And this could be 5 photographs, or this could be your entire community college photographic collection. It's the same for no matter how big your institution is or how big or small your collections are. So are there any other questions about creating digital objects? Matt's going to talk a lot about preserving them, but if you have any questions to get you jump started on creating, don't let it be an intimidating process, because like I said, it's a learning curve. It's very forgiving. I don't know how many times, as long as your physical item is not in risk of deteriorating, you can scan it as many times as you need to. So it's a learning process. I learn something new every day, so just get your feet wet. Any questions? Yeah. Yes, the question was, do we store our master TIFF copies here on site? We do have a server here, and we actually have a server in Wichita. Yep, and sometimes we utilize good old-fashioned external hard drives. So, but yes, we do have, I guess working as a state agency, we have more leeway when it comes to that sort of thing. But yeah, we have 2 servers in 2 different locations, and Matt will mention how important that is when it comes to preserving those items. All right, thank you.